The seal came down on the wax, and the case was closed. Ashen watched it happen from the recorder's bench, close enough to hear the small wet crunch as High Adjudicator Vaunt pressed the ring of his office into the disc of green resin. The disc cooled fast under the daylight dome. In 3 heartbeats it went from soft to hard, from a thing that could still be argued to a thing that could not. That was the whole of conquered law in one sound. A little crunch, and a life folded shut. "The matter of the Coldwater petition is concluded," Vaunt said, not looking up. "The humans' claims are without standing. The record will show the adjudicature found no cause." Ashen's 4 writing fingers were already moving, laying the words into the ledger plate in the old script because Vaunt liked the old script. No cause. He wrote it. He had written it 100 times for 100 petitioners, and it had never once caught in his throat before. At the center of the long chamber, under the great glass dome that poured noon light straight down onto the floor, the human did not move. He was young. That was the first thing anyone noticed and the last thing they remembered, because it did not fit. The conquered expected its enemies to be large. This one was small and plainly made. A narrow male of his kind, maybe 20 of their years, in a gray coat gone pale at the elbows and boots that had been resoled more than once. He had a face you would forget by the time you reached the door. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and his weight even on both feet, and he had stood exactly that way for the entire proceeding, through every ruling, without once raising his voice. Ashen had recorded a great many petitioners. They wept, most of them. They shouted. They pleaded in the wrong grammar and the guards took them out. This one had said very little, and everything he said had been quiet, and Ashen had found himself leaning forward on the bench to catch it, which was not a thing a recorder was supposed to do. "You understand the ruling," Vaunt said. It was not a question. Vaunt was Vorn, tall and pale and robed in the layered gray of the high bench, and he had the Vorn habit of stating things at people as though daring them to disagree. "I understand it," the human said. "It's wrong, but I understand it." A ripple went along the tiers. The long chamber sat 200 when it was full, and it was full today, because a human petition was rare and the galleries liked a spectacle. Robed clerks, scaled cadets from the Garrison Academy in their sashes, a knot of cool Marines by the West Arch with their arms crossed, 3 semi-scholars folded into the scholars' alcove like wet cloaks on a hook. They had come to watch the small thing be told no. They were getting what they came for. Vaunt allowed himself the thinnest curl of satisfaction. "Wrong," he repeated. "The adjudicature has weighed your father's death and found it an accident of the flood season. It has weighed your settlement's claim to the Coldwater intake and found it void, the land being conquered land held in trust. And it has weighed the matter of the unlicensed earth carnivore in your keeping." "His name is Otis," the human said. "It is an unlicensed carnivore," Vaunt said, "imported to a conquered world in violation of the fauna statutes, and the adjudicature orders it surrendered to the garrison for humane disposal within the day. That is mercy. On another world it would already be done." Ashen wrote it. Humane disposal within the day. His fingers were steady. His stomach was not. The human looked at Vaunt for a long moment. There was nothing on his face that Ashen could read as fear, and Ashen had spent his whole career learning to read fear off faces, because a recorder learned to know when a petitioner was about to do something the guards would have to answer for. "You're going to want to change that part," the human said. "The last part. I'd change it now before he gets here." It should have sounded like a threat. Threats came into the long chamber all the time, from petitioners with nothing left, and they died in the air because everyone knew there was nothing behind them. This did not die in the air. The human said it the way a man tells you the tide is coming in, not to frighten you, just so you have the information. "Before who gets here," Vaunt said. The human did not answer. He tipped his head very slightly, the way a creature does when it hears something at the edge of what it can hear, and then Ashen heard it too. Down the long approach beyond the West Arch, past the guard posts and the sealed doors and the 3 checkpoints that stood between the long chamber and the outside daylight, something was walking. Not fast. That was the part that would stay with Ashen for the rest of his life. Whatever it was in no hurry at all. He could hear the tread of it through the stone, a heavy, patient 4-count, pad and pad and pad and pad, and under it a dragging sound he could not place, and closer than either from somewhere ahead of it, the sound of a cool Marine trying to say a challenge and getting only halfway through the first word. "Seal the arch," Vaughn said. His voice had changed. Not much, but Ashen sat close and he heard it. The cool at the west arch moved to seal it, and did not seal it, because the outer guards were already coming through it backward. There is a particular way a soldier moves when he is retreating from something without wanting to turn his back on it, and 4 of the garrison's best were doing it now, sidestepping into the chamber with their weapons up and their weapons useless, hurting the whole front tier back with the flat of their panic. And then the doors at the end of the approach, the great bronze doors that took too cool to move, came open the rest of the way, pushed by nothing anyone could see, and the noon light fell down the long hall and lit the thing that was coming through it. Ashen would try, later, to write down what came through the doors, and he would fail, because the words the conquered had for such things were all wrong for it. It was enormous, that was true. It stood as high at the shoulder as a cool Marine, and it was built like the front of a landslide, deep through the chest, heavy in the skull, and it was covered in a thick pelt the color of old rust and river foam, matted at the flanks and hanging in a loose fold under its throat. Its head was vast and blunt, and its jowls hung down and swung a little as it walked, and from those jowls, in a long, unhurried thread that caught the light, it was drooling. That was the thing the chamber could not survive. Not the size. The drool. The most feared shape on the whole of Oral came down the aisle of the long chamber in the full light of noon, dragging a length of broken chain behind it, and it was drooling like a beast that had smelled its supper, and it was not looking at any of them. It was looking at the boy. "That's him," the human said softly to no one the way you'd greet family. "Hey, there he is." Ashen's fingers had stopped. He made them start again. Somebody had to write this down. The thing came up the aisle at its own slow pace, and the 200 souls in the long chamber came apart around it like water around a hull. The scaled cadets went up the tiers, climbing over one another. A semi-scholar made a sound Ashen had never heard a semi make. The cool Marines, who did not run from things, did not run, but they gave ground, every one of them, stepping back and back until their spines found the wall, and their weapons stayed up and pointed and did not fire, because some animal part of every soldier in that room understood, on a level far below rank, that firing would be the single worst decision of their lives. The beast reached the human and stopped. For a moment it simply stood over him, this landslide of a creature, its head level with the boy's chest, and it breathed on him, one long wet gust that stirred the pale hair at his collar. Then it lowered itself. It did not lunge, and it did not pounce. It folded its great legs under it with the care of an old thing that knows its own weight, and it lay down at the human's feet, and it put its enormous head down on its paws, and it let out a sigh that Ashen felt in the floor of the recorder's bench through the soles of his feet. And then it closed its eyes. Nobody in the long chamber breathed. The human reached down without looking and laid one hand flat on the huge rust-colored skull between the ears and said, "Easy." Just that. And the beast's tail, Ashen had not even understood it had a tail. The thing was so vast, thumped once against the marble, a single heavy beat, and went still. High Adjudicator Vaughn sat at the high bench with his seal ring still on his finger, and the green wax gone hard on the closed case in front of him, and he stared down at the animal lying in the light of his own chamber. And for the first time in the 11 years Ashen had served under him, he did not seem to know what to say. The silence went on too long. Silence was the recorder's enemy. A recorder needed words to write, and there were none, So Ashen sat with his fingers over the ledger plate and watched the most powerful bench on oral fail to produce a sentence. It was Marshal Thren who broke it, and not with a sentence. Thren was cool, the biggest thing in the room that had not just walked in, marshal of the garrison and keeper of the Concord's own war beast, and she had come to the frontier the way soldiers come toward a threat they mean to handle. She got within 6 paces of the animal on the floor. Then she stopped. Ashen watched her stop and watched her face, which was a soldier's face and hard to read, and saw something move across it that he did not have a good name for until much later, when he had time to think about it. It was recognition. "Where," Marshal Thren said, and her voice came out rough, "did that come from?" "He's mine," the human said. "He's been mine since I was a kid. He was my father's before that." He was still looking at the beast, still with his hand between its ears. "His name's Otis." "That is not," Thren stopped, started over. "Adjudicator, that is not a pet." "He is," the human said. "That's exactly what he is." Vaunt found his voice at last and clung to it. "It is an animal that has entered a sealed chamber of the adjudicature. Marshal, remove it." Thren did not move. It was the most extraordinary thing Ashen had seen all day, and he had just watched a legend walk in from the daylight and lie down. A cool marshal, given a direct order by the high adjudicator of the Concord, in front of 200 witnesses, did not move. "Marshal," Vaunt said. "With respect, adjudicator." Thren's eyes had not left the animal. "I will not put a hand on that. You command the garrison of this world." "I command the garrison of this world," Thren agreed, "and I have spent 4 years of it hunting the thing that lives in the Coldwater Basin, and I have lost 11 of my people to it, and I have never once seen it until now." She lifted one broad hand and pointed slowly at the great rust-colored shape breathing on the marble. "That is Sevas." The word went through the long chamber like a crack through ice. Ashen wrote it. Sevas. He wrote it because it was his function to write it, and because writing it gave his fingers something to do while the rest of him tried to understand what the marshal had just said. Every soul on oral knew the word Sevas. Mothers said it to children who would not sleep. The garrison said it in the mess when they wanted to stop a green cadet's boasting cold. It was the name the old records gave to the thing in the basin, the one that finished the string of vanishings and silences out past the Coldwater Flats that 4 commanders in a row had failed to solve, the raider crews that went upriver and did not come down, the survey teams found sitting whole and unharmed beside their dead. The Concord did not have a file for Sevas. It had a legend, and a body count, and a standing order to never send fewer than a full section into the basin after dark. And it was lying on the floor of the long chamber with its head on its paws, asleep, while a human boy scratched it between the ears. "That's a stupid name," the human said mildly. "He answers to Otis." Vaunt rallied. Ashen had to give him that. A lesser Vorn would have fled the bench, and Vaunt only gripped its edge until the color left his knuckles and made himself speak as though the world had not just turned over. "Coincidence," he said. "The marshal is tired. She has hunted a thing for 4 years and she wants it caught, so she sees it where it is not. This is a large animal. It is not a myth. Marshals do not get to close their failures by pointing at the first oversized brute that wanders into a courtroom." "Adjudicator," Thren had not lowered her arm. "I have 4 years of casts, track casts out of the basin mud off 11 sites. I could bring them here within the hour." "Then bring them," Vaunt said. And it was a mistake, and Ashen saw him understand it was a mistake the instant the word left him, because a high adjudicator who says bring the evidence has already conceded that the matter is not closed, and the wax on the desk in front of him said the matter was closed, and both of those things could not be true in the same chamber at the same time. Ashen wrote. The adjudicator directed the marshal to produce her casts. He wrote it small and he wrote it true, and he thought, the case is open again. Nobody had said the words, But the case was open again, and it had been opened by an animal that was, at this moment, snoring. It was, in fact, snoring. Now that the first terror had thinned enough for anyone to notice anything, the whole chamber could hear it, a deep, contented, rattling sound rising out of the rust-colored heap on the floor, the unmistakable noise of a large old creature sleeping hard in a warm patch of sun. The dome poured light straight down onto it. It had chosen, without seeming to choose anything, the single brightest square of marble in the room, and it lay in the middle of it and slept like it had earned the nap, which Ossian would later learn it had. Recorder, Vaunt did not look at him. Strike the marshal's remark from the ledger, it is speculation. Ossian looked at the ledger plate. He looked at the word Sevas, in his own careful old script hand, sitting in the record where he had put it. "I can't, adjudicator," he said. Now Vaunt did look at him. The whole bench looked at him. Ossian was a small thrall in a recorder's plain sash, and he had served 11 years without once being looked at by anyone, which was exactly how a good recorder wished to serve, and he felt every eye in the long chamber land on him, and he kept his fingers still on the plate. "The marshal made the remark in open session," Ossian said, "under oath of office. The old procedure permits striking a speculation only if the speaker withdraws it. She hasn't withdrawn it." He swallowed. "If I strike it and she has not withdrawn it, the record is false, and I took an oath on the record. I can note it as contested. I can't strike it." For a moment he thought Vaunt would have him removed. It would have been within the adjudicator's power. And then Marshal Thren said, without any heat at all, "I do not withdraw it," and that was that, and Ossian's fingers, which had gone cold, warmed again, and he wrote, "Contested by the bench, not withdrawn." He had never in his life felt the particular thing he felt then, which was the feeling of the ground of his whole ordinary life shifting one notch and settling in a place from which it would not shift back. The human, the boy, Eli Wren. Ossian had the name in the record, Eli Wren of Coldwater Settlement, petitioner, had watched all of this without any expression Ossian could read as triumph. If anything, he looked tired. He crouched down beside the enormous animal, one knee on the cold marble, and he checked it over the way a person checks a thing he loves and has been worried about. He lifted a great drooping ear and looked underneath it. He ran his hand down a foreleg and pressed at a joint. He found the broken chain still looped around the beast's neck and worked the collar loose, and set the whole heavy length of it aside on the floor with a clank that made the front tier flinch. "They chained him," Eli said. He said it quietly and not to Vaunt and not really to anyone. He said it to the ledger almost. He said it in the general direction of the record, as though he knew Ossian was writing and wanted this part written down. "When I got the disposal order last night, the garrison came out to Coldwater to take him, to hold him for the morning, for the humane disposal." His voice did something on the words humane disposal that was worse than anger. He let them. That's the thing you need to understand about him. He let them put the chain on, and he let them lead him into the wagon because I told him to go with them, because I thought I still had until morning to fix it in here, with words, the right way. He looked up at the high bench. He waited. All night he waited in that wagon because I asked him to. And then this morning the ruling came in, and somebody at the garrison must have said the word out loud, disposal, where he could hear the shape of it. "Animals do not understand," Vaunt began. "He understood enough," Eli said, "to be here." He stood up. He left the chain on the floor. Ossian looked at the chain. It was garrison stock, thumb-thick, the kind they used on containment carts for things that had to be moved and could not be reasoned with. It had not been cut. It had been broken. There was a difference, and every soldier along the west wall could see the difference, and none of them said anything about the difference because there was nothing useful to say. Here Ossian must set down, for the sake of the record and for the sake of anyone who reads it after him, what the case had been about, because the case was the thing that had brought the boy to the chamber, and the boy was the thing that had brought the beast, and none of what followed makes sense without it. Coldwater Settlement sat at the head of the Coldwater Basin, 140 human souls on a lease the Concord had granted 40 years back when it wanted the basin surveyed and did not want to spend its own people doing it. The humans took the lease because humans, in Ossian's limited experience of them, would take almost any patch of a hard world and call it home and mean it. They built the intake, the great pump house and channel that pulled meltwater off the northern ridges and ran it down through the flats. And the intake was the reason Coldwater lived, because Oral was a dry world under its bright sky, and water on Oral was not a comfort but the whole of the argument. Eli Wren's father had been the settlement's water engineer, Sam Wren. He had kept the intake running for 19 years. He had died 4 months ago, in what the adjudicature's ruling that morning had called an accident of the flood season. A surge down the channel that had taken out the lower gate and taken him with it while he worked to save the pump. The boys' petition said it was not an accident. The boys' petition said that upstream, above the human intake, the Concord had quietly sanctioned a second diversion. A new channel cut to feed a Vaughan agricultural holding that had gone in 2 seasons back, a holding that happened to belong, through 3 layers of trust and proxy, to a sitting member of the adjudicature. The boys' petition said that the new diversion had been dug without accounting for the melt, and that when the big melt came it had overtopped, and the whole of it had come down the old channel at once, all the water that should have spread across 2 channels arriving in one, and that this was the surge that killed his father. The boys' petition asked for 3 things. He asked that the water right of Coldwater be affirmed. He asked that the upstream diversion be regulated so it could not do again what it had done. And he asked that the record show that Sam Wren had not died of an accident but of a decision, so that his name would not carry the word careless in the Concord's books forever. The adjudicature had denied all 3 that morning. It had found the death an accident. It had found the water right void. And it had found, as a matter of routine housekeeping while it had the file open, that the boy was in violation of the fauna statutes, because he kept on Concord land a large earth carnivore without a license, and it had ordered the carnivore destroyed. That was the case. That was what the little crunch of the seal had closed. Ossian had recorded all of it that morning in the flat voice of the record, and he had thought, as he wrote the denial, that it was an ugly ruling but a lawful one, the kind the adjudicature made when the law and the powerful pointed the same direction, and he had expected the boy to weep or shout and be let out, and he had expected to go home and not think about it. Instead, the boy had said, "You're going to want to change that part," and the doors had opened, and now the thing in the record was not a case at all. It was a reckoning, and Ossian was the one holding the pen. "Counselor Adrigal," Vaughn said. Ossian's fingers paused over the plate. He had not expected the adjudicator to say that name, not here, not aloud. Counselor Adrigal sat at the far end of the high bench, 3rd seat from the rail, and Counselor Adrigal was the sitting member of the adjudicature through whose trust and proxy the upstream holding ran, the holding the boy's petition had named, though the ruling that morning had been careful never to say so. Adrigal was Vaughan, older than Vaughn and softer spoken, with the boneless calm of a creature that had never in its long life been on the losing side of anything. "Adjudicator," Adrigal said. "You know this basin," Vaughn said. "It was almost a plea. You hold land in it. Is the marshal's claim possible? Could the thing she has hunted be this?" He gestured at the sleeping animal without looking at it, as though not looking at it kept it smaller. And Ossian, watching Counselor Adrigal, saw the exact moment the old Vaughan understood the trap he was standing in, and it was a beautiful and terrible thing to watch, because Adrigal was too clever by half and you could see all of the cleverness working at once. Because if Adrigal said no, the beast is not Sevas, then the beast was only a large unlicensed animal, and the disposal order stood, and the garrison would be sent to carry it out. And the garrison, Ossian looked at the west wall, at Marshal Thren and her Marines pinned against the stone by 4 years of dead comrades. The garrison would not carry it out, and Adrigal would have ordered a thing that did not happen in open session. And a counselor who orders a thing that does not happen is a counselor whose orders have stopped meaning anything. But if Adrigal said yes, the beast is Sevas, then the most feared thing on the whole of Oral, the killer of the basin, the finisher, belonged to a human boy from Coldwater, and answered to the name Otis, and had walked 40 leagues through 3 garrison checkpoints to lie down at that boy's feet because someone had threatened it. And if that was true, then everything the ruling had said about the boy, that he was small, that he was without standing, that his father's death was an accident, and his water was conquered water, and his animal was a nuisance to be put down. Every word of it had been written by people who did not know what they were looking at. Adrigal was quiet for a long moment. In the quiet, the beast on the floor sighed and rolled a fraction toward the warmth of the light, and its huge paw slid out across the marble and came to rest, gently, entirely by accident, across the toe of Eli Wren's risoled boot. The boy did not move his foot. The paw stayed there. A creature that killed sections of cool Marines lay in the noon light with its foot on a boy's boot like any old dog on any warm floor on any quiet world, and 200 people watched it and did not breathe. "I would need to see the casts," Counselor Adrigal said finally. Which was not a no, which was very carefully not a no. And Ashen wrote it down, because it was his function, and because he understood now that the record he was keeping had stopped being a record of what the adjudicature had decided and become a record of the adjudicature discovering, in front of everyone, that it had decided wrong. Vaunt wanted a recess. Ashen could see him wanting it, the way he shifted the weight of his robes and drew breath to call the mid-session gong. A recess would clear the galleries, empty the record of witnesses, let the bench go behind the carved doors and decide among themselves, in the old way, what the record was permitted to remember. Half of what the adjudicature truly did was done in recess. Ashen had recorded the sessions on either side of 1,000 recesses, and never once been told what happened in the middle. He drew the breath. He did not get to let it out. "I would ask the bench not to recess," Marshal Thren said. "You would ask," Vaunt repeated. "I have lost 11 soldiers to the thing on that floor," Thren said. "I have written 11 letters. I would like the answer to what killed them to be arrived at in the light where their families can read it and not behind a door. That is all. That is the whole of what I would ask." It was not a thing a marshal was permitted to ask an adjudicator, and she asked it plainly, and the galleries heard it, and the trouble with a full gallery is that it becomes a witness to what you deny it. If Vaunt recessed now, every soul on the tiers would carry out of the chamber the story that the high adjudicator had hidden the truth about Sevas behind a door to protect a counselor's water. Ashen watched Vaunt weigh it. He was not a stupid creature, Vaunt. He was a hard one and a proud one, and Ashen had long suspected, a frightened one under the robes, but he was not stupid, and he could count the tears. "We will not recess," Vaunt said, as though it had been his own idea. "The conquered does its work in the open. Marshal, since you are so eager for the light, instruct the bench. You have hunted this thing for 4 years. Tell us what you have hunted. Let us hear whether it matches the animal." So Thren told them, and Ashen wrote it. And for a while the long chamber was very quiet except for the marshal's rough voice and the small scratch of the recorder's fingers and, underneath both, the slow tidal breathing of the sleeping beast in the light. She told them about the first year. A raider crew had come up the Coldwater Channel in the dry season, 4 of them, hard people off a scavenger tender, meaning to hold the intake and sell the settlement its own water back at a price. The garrison had gone after them a day late. They had found the raiders' skiff beached in the reeds 9 leagues up, and the raiders' gear laid out neat on the bank, packs and blades and cutting tools all in a row, and no raiders, not a mark on the ground. Not a print but their own leading in, and one other set leading in after them, broad, four-toed, deep, and none leading out. The garrison had logged it as desertion. Thren had not believed it was desertion. Deserters take their blades. She told them about the survey team. 2 seasons later, a Concord survey party of 6 had gone into the upper basin to map the ridge melt over the settlement's warning and had not come back on schedule. The garrison found them on the 4th day. 3 were dead, a rockfall, the coroner said, a slope come down on their camp in the night. And 3 were alive, sitting together against a boulder 100 paces off, unhurt, unable to say how they had come to be 100 paces off and not under the slope with their fellows, remembering only that something large and quiet had been among them in the dark and had not touched them, and had put itself between the living and the slope, and had stayed until morning and had gone. The garrison logged shock. Thren had gone up herself and stood at the boulder and found, in the dust behind it, the broad four-toed prints, pressed deep, where a great weight had lain all night against the stone at the survivors' backs, facing out. She told them about the child. This one Ashen had not known, and he wrote it carefully, because it was the one that broke the shape the garrison had built around the thing in the basin. Last year, the year before the flood, a settler child from Coldwater had wandered off up the channel at dusk, 5 years old, chasing something, the way small ones do, and the settlement had not missed her until dark, and by full dark the whole of Coldwater was out on the flats with lamps, and the garrison, when word reached it, had done the arithmetic every soldier does and not liked the answer, because a small one alone in the basin after dark, in the country of the thing that finished, was an arithmetic with only one result. They had gone out at first light expecting to find what one finds. They had found her asleep, 2 leagues up the channel, in a hollow of the bank, curled into the flank of something that had gone before they came. A warm hollow, the child said. A big, warm, quiet thing that had found her crying in the dark and lain down around her and kept the cold off and kept the dark off and stayed until it heard the lamps coming up the channel, and then had gotten up, careful not to wake her, and walked away. The child was not afraid. The child had slept better, she said, than in her own bed. 5 years old, Thren said, alone, at night, in the one place on Oral my whole garrison would not go without a full section and fire, and the deadliest thing on the planet found her and lay down around her and kept her warm and left before she woke so as not to frighten her. I filed it as a lost child recovered. I did not know what else to file it as. There is no box on the form for the monster tucked the child in. She was quiet a moment. I have wondered since this morning whether the big, warm, quiet thing smelled cold water on her, whether it knew, the way it knows the channel, that she was one of the ones it keeps. I think it did. I think it has always known exactly whose small ones are whose, and exactly which of us came to the basin to steal water, and which of us only got lost in it. And I think the only creatures on this whole world who could never tell the difference were us. It does not hunt us, Thren said. That is the thing I could never make the record understand. In 4 years it has never once come at a soldier who left the basin alone. It killed my 11 because my 11 went in after it in the dark with fire, and she stopped and chose the word, and Ashen wrote the word it answered. Once each time. Cold. It did not chase the ones who ran. It let them run so they could tell it. I used to think that was cruelty. She looked at the sleeping animal, and at the boy standing over it with his hand loose at his side, and something in her hard soldier's face came undone by a degree. I don't think it was cruelty anymore. I think it was a thing guarding a thing, and I think it let them run because it wanted the running told, so the rest would stay out of its basin so it would not have to answer again. It never wanted the basin. It wanted to be left in the basin. There is a difference, and it took me 4 years and 11 letters to learn it, and a boy has known it his whole life. His name is Otis, Eli said, into the quiet, and it should have been absurd, and it was not. Counselor Adrigal stirred. This is a moving account, he said, in his soft old voice, and I do not doubt the marshal's grief. But grief is not identification. We have a large animal and a set of tragedies and a marshal who wishes to join them. Before this bench so much as considers reopening a lawful ruling, I would want more than a story and a set of tracks that any large predator might leave. I would want it established by someone qualified that the animal in this room is the animal in the basin. Anything less and we are simply frightening ourselves. It was, Ashen had to admit, exactly the right thing for Adrigal to say. It sounded like caution. It sounded like rigor. It bought time, and it moved the question onto ground where a clever counselor with resources might yet manage the answer. And it had the additional advantage of being unanswerable in the moment, because the one creature qualified to identify a basin predator by sight was. Adept Islu is in the scholar's alcove, Ashen said. He had not meant to say it out loud. It was a recorder's reflex, the noting of who was present, and it came out of him before he could stop it. And now the whole bench was looking at the scholar's alcove, where 3 semi were folded into the shadow, and one of them, the middle one older, its mantle gone the deep blue of a semi that has read too long in dim rooms, slowly unfolded a single long limb in the gesture of a scholar who has been named and cannot pretend otherwise. Adept Islu of the Basin Survey. Ashen knew the name because Islu's fauna registers were half of what the adjudicature knew about Oral's living things. The semi had spent 30 years cataloging every crawling and swimming thing in the basin, and had written, Ashen happened to know, the standing order that put not fewer than a full section into the basin after dark, because Islu was the one scholar on Oral who had looked at 4 years of Thren's casts, and concluded that whatever made them was real, was large, was patient, and was not in any register the conquered possessed. Adept, Vaunt said, and there was something almost grateful in it, because a scholar was a way out. A scholar could take the question away into taxonomy and keys and measurements and give the bench a season to breathe. You have studied the basin predator. Examine the animal. Tell the bench what it is. Islu unfolded the rest of the way and came down out of the alcove on its 4 walking limbs, its 2 reading limbs curled up against its mantle, and it crossed the floor toward the sleeping beast with the enormous care of a creature that had spent 30 years learning that the things worth studying were also, very often, the things that ate you. Ashen watched it come. Everyone watched it come. Even the boy watched it come, though the boy did not tense. The boy watched the scholar the way you watch a stranger approach a sleeping friend, ready to say a soft word if it was needed. Islu stopped a body length from the beast. It lowered its mantle until its wide, horizontal eyes were level with the animal's blunt sleeping face, and it looked. It looked for a long time. It did not touch. Semi did their best work at a distance with their whole attention, and Ashen could feel the attention of it, the way you can feel heat off a stone, all of it pointed at the rust-colored heat breathing in the light. And then Adept Islu made a sound. It was very soft. It came out of the semi-speaking siphon in a long descending note, and it was not a word in any language on the bench, and Ashen did not write it in the record because there was no character for it, but he understood it. Everyone understood it, because grief and awe and terror make the same sound in every throat that has ever made a sound. I have measured its prints for 4 years, Islu said when it could speak. I built the danger order on those prints. I told this conquered to fear the basin after dark. Its reading limbs uncurled and hovered, trembling faintly, above the sleeping shape without touching it. I never once considered, the adept said, that the reason it only killed at night, and only killed the ones who came with fire, and never the ones who came alone and quiet. I never once considered that the reason was that in the daylight, in the quiet, when no one came at it with fire, it was lying in the sun somewhere, exactly like this, with its head on its paws. It turned its wide eyes up to the bench. Adjudicator. This is the animal from the basin. I would stake the whole of my register on it. And I would add, for the record, one thing the register never had room to hold, which is that I have been afraid of this creature for 4 years, and I am looking at it now from an arm's length, and it has not so much as opened an eye, and I understand at last that the fear was never the point of it. We were simply never meant to be in its basin at night. The boy was never in danger from it for 1 instant of his life. We were the ones in the wrong country. For a moment Ashen thought that would be the end of it, that the adept's word would settle the room the way the seal had tried to settle the case, and that the bench would find some grave language to fold the ruling back open and let the boy and his animal go home. He should have known better. He had served Vaunt for 11 years. Vaunt did not lose a room by losing a fact. He lost a fact and then went looking for a different room to win. Then it is settled, Vaunt said, and Ashen's fingers slowed because the adjudicator's voice had gone smooth again, and smooth was the sound Vaunt made when he had found new ground. The adept has confirmed it. The animal in this chamber is the basin predator, the creature that has killed 11 of the marshal's soldiers, the thing this Concord has feared for 4 years and could not catch. He let that sit. He turned his pale eyes down to the boy. You have done what the whole garrison of Oral could not. You have brought Sevas out of the basin and into the capital. And you have done it, if I understand the adept correctly, by keeping the single most dangerous predator on this world as a pet, unlicensed, on conquered land. 140 of your own people asleep within reach of it every night. Yes, Eli said. The simple answer seemed to catch Vaughn off guard. He had expected an argument. He recovered. Then the disposal order is not merely upheld, he said. It is urgent. The adjudicature does not destroy the animal this morning because it is a nuisance. It destroys it because it is proven, by the marshal's own testimony and the adept's own register, to be the deadliest creature on Oral, and no bench that valued its people could allow such a thing to go on breathing within reach of them. Marshal, you have your identification. Now you have your order, and this time it is not housekeeping. Summon the means to carry it out. It was, Ashen thought, genuinely clever. It was vile, and it was clever, and it was the two of them at once, which was the most dangerous thing an argument could be. Vaunt had taken the fact that should have freed the boy and turned it, in the space of a breath, into the fact that condemned the animal, and he had done it in the name of the dead, and the dead could not object, and the galleries, who had come to see a spectacle and had gotten a legend, could feel the fear coming back into the room now that the beauty of the thing had worn thin enough to let the old terror through. Sevas. The word did its old work. Half the tears had spent their whole lives afraid of the thing on the floor, and Vaunt was giving them permission to be afraid of it again, and permission to be afraid is the easiest gift a ruler ever gives. Eli Wren looked up at the high bench for a while before he answered. He did not look frightened and he did not look angry. He looked, Ashen thought, like a person doing a sum he had done many times and did not enjoy. You keep saying he killed 11 soldiers, Eli said. The marshal said it better than I can. They went into the basin at night with fire hunting him, and he answered, once each time. That's not a thing that hunts you. That's a thing you kept walking up to. He shook his head slowly. But say you're right. Say he's exactly as dangerous as you need him to be. You've had a disposal order on him since last night. You sent the garrison out to Coldwater to take him, and he let them chain him and put him in a wagon because I asked him to. The deadliest creature on your world spent all last night in a cart, on a chain he could have broken any time he wanted, because a boy asked him to wait. He let his hand rest on the great rust-colored skull. He broke the chain this morning, not last night when they came for him. This morning when the word came down that you were going to kill him. Ask yourself what a thing that dangerous did with all those hours in between when nobody was watching him and he could have done anything at all. He paused. He waited. That's what he did. He's still waiting. He's asleep on your floor. Whatever you're afraid of, it isn't him. He decided a long time ago not to be the thing you're afraid of. You're the only ones who never got the message. The chamber was quiet. Even Vaunt was quiet for the length of a breath, and Ashen wrote the boy's words fast, all of them because they were true, and because he did not trust the record to keep them if he did not. Then Vaunt said, because he could not say it, words, the animal is asleep because it is old and the floor is warm. You would have this bench stake the lives of your settlement and the credibility of Concord law on your reading of a predator's mood. He straightened. No, I will not argue the temperament of a killer with the boy who owns it. I will test it. Marshal, you keep the Concord's champion. Bring it. Let us set a known thing beside this unknown one and see which of them is master of the other. If the boy is right and the creature is a docile old companion that has merely been misjudged, then it will come to no harm from a display. And if I am right and it is the terror of the basin, then the conquered's own beast will show us so, and no soldier need risk a hand. He almost smiled. Bring the maw. Along the west wall, Marshal Thren went very still. Ashen knew, as every soul on Oral knew, what the maw was. The conquered kept it in the deep hold beneath the garrison, in a pit lined with a metal the histories claimed had fallen from the sky, and it was brought up perhaps twice in a decade for the things a conquered occasionally needed a war beast for, a rebel holding that would not yield, a border creature too large for soldiers, a spectacle when the capital needed reminding who its masters were. It was cool-bred over 40 generations for one purpose, which was to end other large living things, and it had never in living memory failed to end what it was set against, and the garrison did not name it, because you did not name a thing like that, you only called it by its office. The maw. The last argument the conquered made when all its other arguments had been refused. Adjudicator, Thren said. I would counsel against it. You would counsel, Vaunt said. You counsel a great deal today, Marshal, for a soldier who could not catch this thing in 4 years. Are you afraid the maw will kill the boy's pet? I thought you were half in love with it yourself. I am afraid, Thren said, slow and flat, of what happens when the maw sees it. I have handled the maw for 9 years. I know it better than anything living. And I will tell this bench plainly for the record that I do not think the maw will do what you want it to do, and I think the reason it will not is the whole answer to this case, and I think when you have seen it you will wish you had let me recess. Bring it, Vaunt said. So they brought the maw. It took a long time, and the length of the time was its own kind of pressure, because the whole chamber sat and waited and listened to it come up out of the deep hold, a different sound entirely from the one that had heralded the beast on the floor. That first sound had been patient. This one was not. This was a huge thing being brought where it did not wish to go, the boom and scrape of it in the lower halls, the shouted counts of the handler teams, the deep grinding cough of a creature that had been chained its whole life and hated the chain and hated the ones who held it and would, given a single unwatched instant, remake the arithmetic of the room in blood. Ashen felt it in the bench before he saw it. The whole chamber felt it. Cadets who had climbed the tiers for a better view began, without quite deciding to climb back down and toward the exits. And through all of it, the coming of the maw, the shudder of it in the stone, the cough and the scrape and the shouted handlers, the beast on the floor of the long chamber did not wake. Eli watched the west approach with his hand still on Otis's skull. He did not draw the animal back or stand it up or ready it for anything. He crouched again beside it, and he put his mouth near one of the great drooping ears, and Ashen was close enough to hear what he said, though he did not write it because it was not for the record. He said, "It's all right. You don't have to do anything. Just be exactly what you are." And the beast's tail moved once against the marble, one slow beat, and was still. Then the maw came into the chamber, and Ashen understood everything. The maw filled the west approach the way a flood fills a culvert. It came on its handler chains, 6 teams of cool leaning back against the pull of it, and it was black and scaled and ridged along the spine with bone, and its head was all jaw, a splitting wedge of a skull that gave it its office, and its small eyes were the color of a banked coal, and everything about it said one thing in a voice older than language, which was, "I will end you, and I have been waiting my whole life to be let off this chain to do it." It saw the animal on the floor. Ashen was watching the maw's eyes because he was a recorder and eyes were where the record lived, and he saw the exact instant the maw saw Otis. He would spend the rest of his career trying to describe it and never do it justice. The maw's whole forward weight, the whole terrible engine of it checked, not gradually, all at once, as though it had run into a wall of glass that only it could see. The great splitting head came up. The banked coal eyes fixed on the rust-colored heap in the pool of daylight, and something went out of them. Not the anger was still there, but the certainty, the whole 40-generation certainty that it was the last argument in any room it entered. That certainty went out of the maw's eyes like a lamp guttering, and what came into them in its place was a thing Ashen had never once expected to see in the eyes of the Concord's champion. It was the thing in the eyes of the survey team at the boulder. It was the thing in the marshal's face when she named it. It was recognition, and under the recognition, laid bare and absolute, it was fear. The maw stopped. It stopped so hard that two of the handler teams stumbled forward into the slack of chains that had, an instant before, been drawn bar tight. It planted its feet. It dropped its head, not to strike. Every soldier in the room knew the difference, and you could feel the knowing go through them. It dropped its head low and turned it a few degrees to the side, bearing the softer scale of its throat toward the floor, toward the sleeping animal in the oldest gesture there is, the one that runs under every language and every world, the gesture that says, "I yield. I did not know you were here. I yield." And it began, with enormous and pathetic care, to back away. "Hold it," Vaughn said, his voice cracked on it. "Marshal, hold it in place, make it." "It won't go forward," Thren said. She had come off the wall. She was moving up beside the maw's flank with the flat ease of a handler who has spent 9 years learning exactly how close she could stand, and she laid one hand on the black-scaled shoulder, and Ashen saw the shoulder trembling under her hand, this mountain of bred violence trembling like a beaten thing, and Thren's own face had gone soft and stricken. "Adjudicator, it will not go forward. I could put every team on the chains and it will not go forward, and if I force it, it will turn on us, because a cornered thing turns on whatever it can reach, and the one thing in this room it will not reach for is the animal you told me to set it against." She looked up at the bench. I told you you would wish you had recessed. The maw is the most dangerous thing the Concord ever made, and it has looked at a boy's dog and decided it would rather die than touch it. There is your test. It is the only answer you are going to get, and it is not the one you wanted, and it is in front of 200 witnesses, and I am glad. Through all of it, Otis slept. That was the part the chamber could not get past, the part Ashen wrote 3 times in 3 different ways before he found the plain words for it. The Concord's champion, the maw, the last argument, was backing across the floor of the long chamber with its throat bared and its coal eyes wide, yielding to a thing it had never met, in terror of a thing that had not moved, and the thing it feared lay in the sun with its head on its paws and did not so much as lift an eyelid. It did not need to wake. That was the whole of it. The most feared shape on Oral had entered the room, and the sleeping animal had not judged it worth waking for. Only once did Otis stir. As the maw reached the west approach again, backing low, one of the handler teams lost its footing and a chain rang loud against the marble, a bright, ugly clash of sound, and at that sound, not at the maw, at the sound, the beast on the floor opened one eye. Just one. It was a dark, wet, brown eye, filmed a little with age, and it rolled once toward the noise and found it and waited and found it beneath concern, and it closed again. That was all. One eye opened and closed. And the maw, seeing even that much, seeing the single half-lidded glance of the thing on the floor, made a sound Ashen had never heard it make, a high sound, wrong for its size, and put the last of its weight into going backward, and the handler team simply let it, because there was nothing else sane to do. They took the maw back down to the deep hold. It went eagerly. It went the way a soldier goes back behind a wall when the shelling starts, and the last the chamber heard of it was the boom and scrape of it descending, faster than it had come, desperate to put stone between itself and the pool of daylight where the old dog slept. Even then the bench reached for one more handhold, because a bench falling will grab at anything. A counselor from the seats below the rail, a younger Vorn, eager, the kind that has not yet learned when a thing is over, proposed that if the garrison could not remove the animal, the garrison could contain it. A null cage, of the kind the deep hold used for the maw, lowered over it while it slept. The matter settled without a hand laid on it. The danger managed the tidy Concord way. He got the whole sentence out before he understood that no one was going to help him finish the thought. Adept Islu answered him, not unkindly, from the alcove. "You are thinking of it as a thing that must be held. the adept said. A thing that stays where it is put once the walls are strong enough. But you have watched it walk 40 leagues through 3 checkpoints and a sealed bronze door to lie down beside that young man, and you saw the door. It was opened. Not broken, opened. Consider what it means that the deadliest creature on Oral did not smash its way in here, but let itself in, quietly, the way a thing comes home. A cage holds what wants out. There is nothing in this animal that wants out. It is exactly where it wishes to be, at the feet of exactly whom it wishes to be at the feet of, and it will remain there for precisely as long as he remains, and not one instant past. You cannot contain a thing that has already arrived at the only place it was ever trying to go. You can only decide whether to be at peace with where it has arrived. The young counselor sat down. No one took up the null cage again. For a long while nobody in the long chamber said anything at all. Ashen looked down at his ledger plate. He had written in the flat old script, "The Concord's champion was brought against the animal and would not approach it. It yielded and withdrew. The animal did not wake." It was the truest sentence he had ever set into a record, and it ended the case as surely as any seal, and no one on the high bench had the standing left to strike it, because 200 witnesses had watched every word of it come true. Eli Wren stood up. He had not gloated during any of it. He did not gloat now. He looked, if anything, a little sad, the way a person looks when a thing he already knew has finally been believed at a terrible cost to everyone but himself. "I didn't bring him here to do that," he said. "I want that in the record too. I didn't bring him at all. I told him to wait, and he waited as long as he could stand it, and then he came because you were going to kill him, and even then he didn't come to fight you. He came to lie down next to me. That's the only thing he ever wants to do. He's a very simple animal when you get down to it. He wants to lie in the sun near the people he's decided are his, and he wants to be left in his basin, and he does not want to be come at with fire in the dark. Give him those 3 things and he is the gentlest creature you will ever meet in your lives. Take them away and you get," he gestured once, at the empty west approach where the maw had fled, "you get what you just watched refuse to happen. So maybe now we can talk about my father. Since apparently I finally have the room's attention." High on the bench, Counselor Adrigal had gone the pale gray that Vorn go when the blood leaves them, and he was looking at the boy, and he was, Ashen realized, no longer thinking about the animal at all. He was thinking about the diversion. He was thinking about the water that had come down the old channel all at once. He was thinking about a settlement of 140 human souls at the head of the basin, and the boy who spoke for them, and the animal that lay at the boy's feet. An animal, the deadliest thing the Concord owned, had just refused to touch. And he was doing the arithmetic that Vaunt had refused to do, and the arithmetic was very bad. Because the case the adjudicature had closed that morning was not, it turned out, the case of a small powerless human without standing. It had never been that case. It had only looked like that case to people who did not know what they were looking at. It was the case of the one settlement on Oral that the most feared creature on the planet had, for reasons of its own, decided to guard. And that settlement's water had been stolen, and that settlement's engineer had been killed taking it back, and every soul in the long chamber had just watched, with their own eyes, what happened to things that came at what this animal guarded with fire in the dark. "Yes," Vaunt said. His voice had lost all its smoothness. It was just a voice now, an old creature's voice, coming out of a mouth that had run entirely out of rooms to win. "Yes, I think we had better talk about your father. Reopening a closed matter is not a small thing under Concord law." And Ashen, who knew the procedure better than anyone in the room because it was his to keep, watched the adjudicature try to do it with what dignity it had left. Vaunt did it the only way that would hold. He could not simply say I was wrong, because a high adjudicator who says that once will be made to say it again, and a bench that can be made to say it stops being a bench. So he reached for the old formula, the one the founders had built for exactly this, for the day the adjudicature discovered it had ruled on a thing it did not understand. "The matter of the Coldwater petition," Vaunt said, and his hand went to the disk of hardened green wax in front of him, and he lifted it off the desk, and he broke it, snapped the closed seal in half between his fingers, which is a thing an adjudicator may do only to his own seal and only once per matter, "is found to have been decided on an incomplete record. The adjudicature reopens it, on the bench's own motion, and holds its prior ruling void. Let the record show the seal was broken by the hand that set it." Ossian wrote it. He wrote it with a steadiness that surprised him. The seal was broken by the hand that set it. He had recorded the closing of 10,000 matters and the reopening of perhaps 4, and he understood that he was writing a sentence that clerks would still be reading in the archive 100 years on, and he found that his fingers did not shake at all, because a recorder's whole art is to be steady exactly when the thing he records is not. The two halves of the green disk lay on the desk in front of Vaunt like a thing that had been alive, and was not any more. Counselor Adrigal moved before Vaunt had finished. Ossian had expected him to. A clever creature caught in a collapsing structure does not wait for the roof. It goes at once for the one door it can still reach. And Adrigal, who had spent a long life never being on the losing side of anything, went for the door the way only the very practice goes, smoothly, warmly, as though it had been his intention all along. "May I speak?" Adrigal said, and did not wait for leave. "The bench does well to reopen this. I have said from the first that grief deserves a hearing, and I am moved, genuinely moved, by what we have all witnessed. This young man has lost his father. He has been failed by a process that moved too fast. The conquered owes him better." He turned the whole weight of his soft old attention on Eli, and it was, Ossian thought, a masterwork of a thing, because every word of it was true, and every word of it was a hand closing a door. "So let me propose, in the spirit of setting right what was set wrong, that the adjudicature act at once today, without the delay of further inquiry that would only prolong this young man's pain. Let the disposal order be struck. It is struck, I so move, and I cannot imagine the bench dissenting. Let the animal go home unharmed. Let the water right of Coldwater be affirmed in full. The settlement shall have its intake and its lease in perpetuity. And let the conquered make a grant to the family of the late engineer, a generous one, in acknowledgment of a tragedy the flood season inflicted on a good man. Let us give this young man everything he came for, and let us give it to him now, so that he may take his companion and go home and grieve in peace, instead of spending more weeks in this cold hall reliving the worst day of his life for the entertainment of the tears. That is my motion. I would call it mercy. I would call it the least we can do." It was beautifully done. Ossian watched half the bench begin to nod, because it sounded like everything. It sounded like total surrender. It sounded like the conquered humbling itself and opening its purse, and it gave the boy every single thing his petition had asked for except the one thing that would have named Adrigal. It struck the disposal order. It affirmed the water. It paid the family. And it called the death a tragedy the flood season inflicted. An accident, an act of the season, with no decision behind it and no counselors holding upstream and no diversion cut without accounting for the melt. It bought the boy off with everything he wanted in order to keep the one thing Adrigal could not survive. Ossian looked at Eli Wren to see whether he would take it. A great many people would have taken it. It was, by any measure a grieving young man was likely to make, a total victory. Go home. Keep your dog, keep your water, take the money. Grieve in peace. Eli was quiet for a moment. He had crouched again by the animal. He did that, Ossian was learning when he was thinking, put a hand on the dog the way another person might fold their hands, and now he straightened, and he looked up at the soft old Vorn who had just offered him the world. "That's a good offer," Eli said. "I want to be honest that it's a good offer, and that part of me wants to take it because I'm tired and I do want to go home." He nodded slowly. "But you slid one word in there and I caught it, and I think you meant me to be too tired to catch it. You said the flood season inflicted this. You want me to sign for the money and the water and let the record keep saying it was the season, and it wasn't the season. His voice did not rise. It never rose. That was the thing about him. Ashen had stopped waiting for it to rise. My father spent 19 years reading that channel. He knew the melt the way you know the back of your own hand. The season didn't kill him. A decision killed him. Somebody cut a second channel upstream to water a Vorn holding and didn't account for the big melt. And when the big melt came, it all came down at once, down the old channel, on top of my father while he was trying to save the pump so 140 people would still have water in the morning. That's not a tragedy the season inflicted. That's a thing a person did. And I'm not going to take your money to help you call it weather. The long chamber was very quiet. Adrigal's soft face had not changed. He was far too old a hand to let it change, but Ashen, close, saw the small, still thing behind the eyes, the calculation running and finding fewer and fewer rooms. That is a serious accusation, Adrigal said gently, and an unsupported one. Grief looks for a hand to blame. It is natural, but this bench cannot rule on the back of a bereaved young man's certainty. If there were a second diversion cut without accounting for the melt, there would be records, engineering filings, water authority approvals, survey data. Bring them. Absent them, we have a boy's grief and a dead man's reputation, and I would not stake either on a story. He spread his long hands, the picture of reason. I say again, take the settlement. It is more than the record can prove. It is everything you can prove and a great deal you cannot. Take it and go home. And it was here, Ashen would think for the rest of his life, that the whole matter turned, and it turned on the smallest thing, and the smallest thing was this. Adrigal had said the word records. Because records were Ashen's country. Records were the one thing in the long chamber that belonged to the small thrall on the recorder's bench, and to no one else. And when Adrigal said there would be engineering filings, water authority approvals, survey data, absent them we have nothing. A memory moved in Ashen the way a fish moves under ice, a shadow and then a shape, and the shape was a filing. He had seen it. He was almost sure he had seen it. Months ago, before the death, before any of this, a filing had come up from the Coldwater Basin, from the settlement's water engineer, routed through the adjudicature's works office because all basin water matters routed through the adjudicature, and it had crossed Ashen's bench for the record stamp. The way 10,000 dull filings crossed his bench, and he had stamped it and archived it and forgotten it, because that was the job, and the job was to forget. But a recorder's forgetting is not like other forgetting. A recorder forgets the way the archive forgets, which is to say, he does not forget at all. He only puts the thing where he will not trip over it until he needs it. Ashen needed it now. He looked up from the ledger plate. Across the floor, the boy was drawing breath to answer Adrigal, to say that he would find the records, that he would go home and dig through his father's papers and come back, which would take weeks, weeks in which a great many filings in a great many offices could quietly cease to exist. And Ashen, who had spent 11 years being looked at by no one, who had already that day refused an adjudicator once and lived, opened his mouth a second time. There is a filing, Ashen said. Every head on the high bench turned to the recorder's bench, and Ashen felt the turn as a physical pressure, and he made himself go on. There is a filing, he said again, in the works archive, from the Coldwater intake, from the settlement's water engineer. He looked at the boy and then away from the boy because the boy's face had done something at the words the settlement's water engineer that Ashen could not look at and keep his voice level. It crossed this bench for the record stamp some months ago, before the flood season. I stamped it myself. I remember it because engineers do not usually file the way this one filed. Most works filings are requests, permits, allotments, repairs. This one was not a request. It was a warning. He drew a breath. The engineer had learned of the upstream diversion, the new channel cut to feed the holding above his intake, and he filed to say that it had been cut without proper accounting for the melt volume, and that in a heavy melt year the upper channel would overtop and send its water down the old channel all at once, and that if it did, the lower gate at Coldwater would not hold it, and people would die. He asked the works office to order the diversion regraded before the melt. He put numbers to it. Engineers put numbers to things. I remember the numbers were precise. He was very sure. He filed it as urgent. The silence in the long chamber had changed its quality. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of a great many people doing the same arithmetic at the same time and arriving together at the same cold total. "And what?" said Vaunt, and his voice was careful now, terribly careful, because he had begun to see where the floor was falling away, and he did not know yet whether he was standing on the safe side of the crack. What did the works office do with this urgent filing recorder? Ossian looked at the ledger plate, though he did not need it. He had the shape of the memory now, whole, the way the archive gives a thing back once you have found the thread of it. It was returned to the engineer, he said, with a disposition stamp. The stamp is the standard one for a filing the office declines to act on. He made himself say the words. The disposition was, "No cause found." The filing is archived under that disposition. I stamped the record of it. I did not read the numbers closely at the time. It was one filing among a great many, and it had already been dispositioned by the works office before it reached me, and my function was only to record that the disposition had been made. He looked up. My function is to record that things happened. It is not to ask whether they should have. I have told myself that for 11 years. I find today that it is not as much comfort as it used to be. No cause found. Ossian watched the words land, and he watched the boy hear them, and he understood with a recorder's terrible clarity that he had that morning written those same 3 words into the record of the son's petition. No cause, the very phrase that had been stamped onto the father's warning months before. The same 3 words used to close the father's warning and then, later, to close the son's grief. As though the whole apparatus of the Concord had only the one stamp and used it on every human who came asking to be believed. He had written it that morning in the old script because Vaunt liked the old script, and he had felt it catch in his throat, and now he knew why. Some part of him, the archive part, the part that did not forget, had already known where he had seen those words before. "I want the filing brought," Eli Wren said. His voice was not level anymore. It was not loud, it would never be loud, but it had gone rough at the edges, the way a voice goes when a person has just learned that the thing he suspected was worse than he suspected, and worse in a way that has a date on it. "My father filed a warning that people would die, months before he died, and somebody stamped it no cause and put it in a drawer. I want it brought. I want it read out. I want to hear the numbers he put on it, because he was right about the numbers. He was right down to the gate. And I want the numbers read in this room in front of the people who filed them in a drawer." "Bring the filing," Vaunt said. It came faster than the casts would have, faster than the maw, because the works archive sat 2 floors down, and a filing weighs nothing. A clerk brought it up on a reader plate and set it before the bench, and Vaunt looked at it, and did not read it aloud, and Ossian understood from the stillness of him that Vaunt had just seen the disposition signature at the bottom, the name of the clerk who had stamped "no cause found" on a warning that people would die. "Read the signature," Adrigal said. It was a mistake, and Ossian saw Adrigal know it was a mistake even as he made it, but he had made it out of the same instinct that had served him for a long life. Control the reveal, name the small clerk, sacrifice the small clerk, keep the reveal small, and it was the wrong instinct in a room that had just watched the maw flee an old dog. Because the room was past managing now, the room wanted the whole of it, and a partial answer would only make the room dig. "I will read the whole of it," Vaunt said, "or none." And he chose, and Ossian saw him choose, and he was almost proud of the old creature for the choosing, because it cost Vaunt more than anyone but a recorder would ever know. Vaunt read the whole of it. He read the engineer's warning into the record of the long chamber in the flat voice of the bench, and it was worse read flat. It was always worse flat. He read the numbers, the melt volume projections, the channel capacities, the overtopping threshold, which the engineer had calculated to a precision that made the scholars in the alcove go still, because semi-respected precision, and here was precision spent in defense of 140 lives and stamped no cause. He read the engineer's plain closing line, which the engineer had put at the bottom under all the numbers, not in the language of permits but in the language of a man who has done his sums and does not like the answer. If the regrade is not ordered before the melt, the lower basin will flood without warning, and the intake crew will be in the channel when it does, because that is where the intake crew is during the melt. I am the intake crew. I am asking you to order the regrade. S. Wren, Engineer Coldwater. Vaughn stopped reading. The long chamber had gone entirely silent, and in the silence the only sound was a small one, and it came from the boy. He had not made a sound through any of the rest of it, not through the ruling that morning, not through the beasts coming, not through the maws fleeing. He made one now, one only, a single short breath drawn in and held, the sound of a person hearing his father's voice come out of the mouth of the man who had let his father die. And then he mastered it, and he put his hand down on the great rust-colored skull beside him, and the old dog, without waking, leaned its enormous weight a fraction into the boy's leg, the way an animal does when the person it belongs to has gone quiet in a wrong way, and the boy steadied against it, and did not fall. It was Vaughn, in the end, who asked the question the whole room was holding, and he asked it looking straight down the bench at the third seat from the rail. "Whose office," he said, "dispositioned this filing?" The works clerk who had brought the reader plate was still standing at the foot of the bench, a young Vaughan Jr., the kind of clerk who carries things up and down stairs and hopes never to be spoken to, and now the whole long chamber was looking at it, and it looked as though it wished the floor would take it. The works office adjudicator, it managed. The basin water desk. The basin water desk, reports to which counselors oversight. The clerk did not want to say. Ossian did not blame it. But a recorder learns to see the shape of a chain of authority, the way a mason sees the shape of a wall, because the record is nothing but chains of authority written down, and Ossian already knew the answer, and so, he could see, did every counselor on the bench who had ever bothered to learn how the works office was run. "Counselor Adrigal's oversight," the clerk said barely. "I oversee 11 desks," Adrigal said at once, smooth, ready. He had had the whole reading to prepare for this, and he had prepared well. "I do not read every filing that crosses each of them, any more than the high adjudicator reads every writ that leaves this bench. A junior officer at the water desk made a disposition. If it was the wrong disposition, that is a failure of that desk, and it grieves me, and the officer responsible will answer for it. But you cannot lay a clerk's stamp at a counselor's feet. If we ran the Concord that way, no counselor could oversee anything. We would all be hostage to the worst decision of our least officer." He turned his hands up again. "By all means discipline the desk. I will sign the order myself." It was, again, exactly the right thing to say, and it would have worked, Ossian thought, on any other day, in front of any other room. Sacrifice the clerk. Own the failure at the level where it cost nothing. Sign the discipline order yourself and look like the counselor who cleaned his own house. On any other day it would have closed the question. But Ossian was the recorder, and the recorder had the routing. "The disposition was not made at the desk," Ossian said. He did not raise his voice either. He was noticing that about himself today, that he had somehow caught the boy's habit, that the whole room had, that the loudest thing in the long chamber had become the quietest, and everyone had learned to lean toward it. Every disposition carries its routing in the record. It is automatic. The works clerks cannot alter it, and neither can I. It is the one part of a filing that writes itself. The engineer's warning was received at the basin water desk, and the desk did not disposition it. The desk rooted it up, flagged urgent, as the engineer filed it to the oversight, for a decision above the desk's authority, because a filing that warns of loss of life is above a desk's authority to decline, and the desk knew that, and did the correct thing and sent it up. He looked at the reader plate on the bench. The disposition "no cause found" was entered from the oversight and routed back down to the desk to archive. The routing is on the filing. It is on the plate in front of the bench. It cannot be otherwise because the routing writes itself, and I did not write it, and the clerk did not write it, and it says what it says. Vaughn looked down at the plate. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned the plate over slowly, so that its face caught the light of the dome, and he read the routing aloud, because he had already decided, some minutes ago, that he would read the whole of everything today or none of it, and there was no stopping halfway down a thing like this. The routing said the filing had gone up to the oversight. The routing said the disposition had come down from the oversight. The routing carried the oversight's own authentication, the small unforgeable mark that a counselor's office pressed into every decision it made, because the Concord had built the routing to be unforgeable precisely, so that no counselor could ever say a clerk did it. It had been built, 40 founders ago, to protect the small from the great. And it worked. Today, at last, it worked. "The authentication is yours, counselor," Vaughn said. Adrigal said nothing. There was, for the first time all day, nothing for the clever old creature to say, because the one thing cleverness cannot argue with is a mark it pressed with its own hand into a record built, so that it could never take the mark back. He had dispositioned the engineers, warning himself. He had read the numbers, he must have read them. The routing showed the filing open at his oversight for the better part of a day, and he had looked at the melt projections and the overtopping threshold and the plain closing line. "I am the intake crew. I am asking you to order the regrade." And he had stamped "no cause found" and sent it down to a drawer, because ordering the regrade would have cost his holding a season's water, and the melt might not come heavy, and the engineer might be wrong. And if the engineer was not wrong, well, the channel ran through human land, and the intake crew were human, and the Concord had a stamp for that. Ossian wrote it. He wrote it in the old script, every word, the routing and the authentication and the disposition and the mark, and he did not feel steady now. He felt something else entirely, but his fingers were steady, because that was the one gift he had, to keep his fingers steady over a true thing while the rest of him came apart, and he gave the true thing the steadiness it deserved. And here Ossian must leave the bench for a little while, and set down the part he did not see with his own eyes, because the boy told it to the chamber in the quiet after the mark was named, and it belongs in the record, and a record that keeps only the crimes and not the reasons a creature came to be guarded is only half a record. The boy told them where the dog had come from. Otis had not always been Eli's. He had been Sam Wren's first, and before that he had been nobody's. An animal the settlement had found in the second winter, half dead in a drift out past the intake. A huge young dog of a mountain-bred kind that no one at Coldwater could account for, because the transport manifests did not list a dog, and no colonist admitted to smuggling one down, and the likeliest story, the one the settlement settled on, was that he had come down in the same lost cargo drop that had scattered half their second winter supplies across the flats, a crate stove in. An animal walked out of it into the cold and kept walking until the cold nearly won. Sam Wren had found him. Sam Wren had thawed him out by the pump-house stove and fed him from his own ration for a month, because the settlement had nothing to spare that winter, and the dog had lived, and had never after that been more than a body length from Sam Wren, if Sam Wren could help it. "My father used to say he wasn't a smart dog," Eli said. "He'd say it like a compliment. He'd say Otis has exactly one idea in his head and it's you, and there's no room in there for a second idea, and that's the best kind of dog there is." He almost smiled. He did not quite get there. He grew up on the intake. He knew that channel the way my father did, where the ground was soft, where the gate stuck, when the melt was coming by the smell of it. My father used to take him down the channel every morning, the two of them, checking the gates. 19 years the intake ran, and for the last 13 of them there was a dog walking the channel every morning beside the man who kept it. The settlement got so used to the two of them that people set their clocks by it. If you saw Sam and Otis coming up from the lower gate, It was the 7th hour, and the water was good for another day. The night the diversion overtopped, Eli said, my father was at the lower gate. Where else would he be? The melt came down heavy, just like he said it would in the filing nobody read, and it came down the old channel all at once, just like he said, and the lower gate wouldn't hold it, just like he said, and he was in the channel trying to save the pump when it came. He was looking at the floor now, at the animal, not at the bench. Otis was with him. Otis was always with him. That's the part I know for certain, because when the settlement came down at first light, the whole settlement came down, everyone who could walk, because the alarm went at the pump house and everyone knew what the alarm meant. When we came down, Otis was there. He'd gotten out of the water somehow. He was soaked through, and there was a gash along his ribs where something in the flood had caught him, and he was standing at the edge of the channel where the bank had held, and he wouldn't come to any of us, and he wouldn't stop. He kept going a little way down the bank and coming back, a little way and back, until somebody finally understood that he wanted us to follow. He stopped. The long chamber waited. Even Adrigal waited, because there is a kind of story that even a cornered creature does not dare to interrupt. He took us 2 leagues downstream, Eli said, along the bank at that slow, steady pace of his, stopping every so often to make sure we were still coming. 2 leagues. And then he went down to the water's edge in a bend where the current had laid things up on a gravel bar, and he lay down next to what the current had laid there, and he put his head down and he stopped. And that's where we found my father. He drew a breath and let it out slowly. The doctor said he'd been gone since the surge, since the night before. Which means Otis had already found him in the dark hours before we came, and had stayed with him on that gravel bar all night in the cold with a gash in his side, and had not left him, and had only left him long enough at first light to walk 2 leagues back up the bank to fetch us, so my father wouldn't have to be found by strangers. So he'd be found by his own. Eli looked up at last. You keep asking what kind of animal I've got. That's the kind, that's the whole of it. He has one idea in his head, and it's the people he's decided are his, and there is no room in there for a second idea, and when the water took the person whose idea he was, he stayed with the body all night and then went and got the family. That's your monster. That's Sevas. That's the thing your champion just ran from. Ashen had stopped writing. He made himself begin again. His fingers were not as steady as he would have liked, and he let them be unsteady for the length of that one entry, because some things should be recorded in a hand that shows what it cost to record them. It was Adept Islu in the end, who put the last piece into the light, and it did it quietly from the alcove, in the voice of a scholar who has spent 30 years being wrong about a thing and has just been shown, all at once, the shape of its wrongness. I built the danger map, Islu said. 4 years of it, every sighting, every site, every cast plotted across the basin. I always read it as a hunting range, the territory of a predator marked by its kills. Its reading limbs made a slow gesture, tracing a shape in the air that only it could see. But I heard the young man describe his father's morning walk, the lower gate, the upper gate, the channel between. And I am seeing my own map behind my eyes, and I am realizing that it is not a hunting range at all. The sights do not spread out from a den the way a predator's do. They line a road. My 4 years of Sevas sights lie along the intake channel, and along the ridge above it where the melt comes down, and around the flats where the settlement sleeps. They trace, almost exactly, the ground a water engineer and his dog would walk to keep 140 people alive. It turned its wide eyes to the animal in the light. I did not map a predator's kills. I mapped a guardian's rounds. The thing came at the raiders, because the raiders came for the water. It came at my 11 soldiers, I am sorry, Marshal, because they came into its rounds at night with fire, and it could not tell a soldier hunting it from a raider come to hold the intake. They came the same way in the dark, armed, toward the thing it guards. And it put itself between the slope and the survey team, because the survey team, whatever else they were not coming for the water. They were only lost in its country at night, and a thing that guards does not kill what only stumbles through. It shelters it and sees it to morning, Islu was quiet a moment. I have been afraid of a guardian for 4 years, and I called it a monster in the register, and I taught a whole garrison to fear it, and every soldier I frightened made the basin more dangerous, because a frightened soldier goes in with more fire, and more fire is the one thing that makes a guardian answer. We made the danger. We made the danger, and then we blamed the dog. No one spoke for a while after that. The dome poured its noon light straight down. In the pool of it, the great rust-colored animal slept on, having guarded a road for 13 years and a man for all of them and a boy now, having asked for nothing in return, but to lie in a warm patch of light near the person it had decided was its whole idea. And it did not know, and would never know, that it had just turned over the highest bench on Oral without lifting its head. And that was, Ashen thought, exactly why it had been able to. Then the boy, who had said all of it without once raising his voice, turned back to the high bench, and to the third seat from the rail, and to the old creature who had stamped no cause found on the warning that would have saved his father, and he said the only hard thing he said all day. "You read the numbers," Eli said. "The routing shows you had the filing open a whole day, so you read them. You read where he wrote, 'I am the intake crew, I am asking you,' and you knew that meant him personally standing in the channel when the water came. And you stamped it no cause because a regrade would have cost your holding a season of water." He shook his head slowly. "I don't want your money. I told you that. I want 3 things, and they're the same 3 things I came in here with this morning before any of this. I want the water right of Coldwater made safe, and the diversion regraded so it can't do this again. I want it in the record that my father was right, that he filed the warning, and that it was true, and that he didn't die careless. He died at his post doing the thing he'd warned you about because you wouldn't let him fix it. And I want the record to say who stamped the warning and why. That's all. That's everything. I'm not asking you to punish anybody. I've watched what happens when people go looking to punish things in this basin, and I don't have the stomach for it, and neither does he." He put his hand on the dog. "I just want it written down true. Your whole Concord runs on things being written down. So write this down true and let me take my father's dog home, and we'll leave you your basin. We only ever wanted the one road in it." The bench did not answer at once. Benches never do. A bench that answers a hard thing at once is a bench that has been bought or frightened, and Ashen had seen both, and this was neither. This was the rarer thing, a bench that did not know what it was going to do and had to find out in front of everyone. Vaughn could have recessed. It would have been the ordinary course. The ordinary course, when a counselor's mark turns up on a crime, is to close the doors and decide among the bench how much of the counselor to spend. Ashen watched Vaughn's hand drift toward the mid-session gong and watched it stop, and understood that Vaughn was doing a harder sum than he had done all day. If he recessed now, he would be recessing to save Adrigal, and every soul on the tiers knew it, and the record Ashen had kept, unstruck all day, would show a high adjudicator who read a counselor's mark on a dead man's warning, and then closed the doors. Vaughn had spent the whole morning learning what the record could do to a creature. He had watched it break the maw's own master's certainty. He had watched it corner the cleverest counselor on the bench with a mark that wrote itself. He was, Ashen thought, the last person in the long chamber who still needed convincing that the record was the most dangerous thing in the room, and he had just finished being convinced. "We will not recess," Vaughn said for the second time that day, and this time no one had asked him to, and that made it a different thing entirely. "The Concord does its work in the open. We have said it often. We will find out today whether we meant it." Adrigal made his last move then. Ashen had been waiting for it. A creature like Adrigal always had one more, and it was always the cleverest, because it was the one it had saved. "Adjudicator." Adrigal's voice was different now, lower, graver, stripped of the warmth, because the warmth had stopped working, and a clever creature does not keep spending a coin that has stopped buying. "Before this bench does something it cannot undo, let it consider what it is about to do, not to me, to itself. I am one counselor. If you enter my mark into the open record beside the word this boy wants beside it, You do not remove one counselor. You establish that a counselor's oversight mark can be read into open session against the counselor on the motion of a petitioner and the memory of a recorder. You establish that the routing the founders built to protect the small can be turned in open court to break the great. Every counselor at this bench oversees desks. Every one of us has dispositioned filings we did not read closely, made calls that looked worse later, trusted a desk that should not have been trusted. If you do this today, you do it to all of us forever. You make every mark any of us ever pressed a rope that a clever petitioner and a patient clerk can someday hang us with. He let it settle. I will spare the bench that. I will resign my seat now quietly and retire from the basin, and the holding will be sold and the water will run where the young man wants it to run. Give him his water and his father's good name, but leave my mark out of the open record, and let a counselor leave with the dignity the office is owed, and do not teach this chamber that the record can be turned against the bench itself. That is the last mercy I will ask, and I ask it for the bench, not for me. It was, Ossian thought, the best thing anyone had said all day, and the most nearly true and the most dangerous, because it was aimed exactly at the one fear a bench has that is larger than its fear of being wrong, which is its fear of being made answerable. Adrigal was not offering to save himself. He had given himself up, the seat, the holding, the water, all of it gone. He was offering to save the bench from the precedent, from the day the record stopped being the bench's instrument and became a thing the bench itself could be measured against. And Ossian watched 2 or 3 of the counselors begin slowly to see the sense of it, because it would cost them nothing and the boy would still get everything he came for, and the terrible new idea would be put quietly back in its box. The boy started to speak. Ossian saw him draw the breath, and then, before the boy could answer, someone else answered, and it was the last person Ossian expected, and it was the reason Ossian would remember that day as the day he learned what his own bench was actually made of. "No," said Marshal Thren. She had come all the way off the west wall now, into the light, and she stood near the animal, not too near. Even now, knowing everything, she kept the handler's distance out of pure trained respect, and she faced the high bench with her rough soldier's face, and she was not asking for anything. "I wrote 11 letters," Thren said, "over 4 years, to 11 families, and in every one of them I told a mother or a mate or a child that their soldier had died hunting a monster in the basin, in the conquered service, doing a hard, necessary thing. I believed it when I wrote it. I know now it was not true. My soldiers did not die hunting a monster. They died hunting a guardian that never wanted them, in a basin the conquered should never have sent them into with fire, because the conquered would not spend a season of one counselor's water to regrade a channel a human engineer told it, in writing, would kill people." Her voice did not break. It was worse that it did not break. "You want to leave the mark out of the open record. You want the counselor to retire with dignity. I understand why. But I have 11 families who are owed the truth of why their soldiers died, and the truth of why their soldiers died runs straight through that mark. And if you leave it out to spare the bench a hard precedent, then I go on being the marshal who lied to 11 families to protect a counselor's water, and I will not do it. I have done it for 4 years without knowing. I will not do it now that I know." She looked at Adrigal, and there was no hatred in it, which made it worse. "You ask for the dignity the office is owed. The office is owed the truth. That is the only thing it was ever owed. Everything else it took." Vaunt sat with the 2 halves of his broken seal in front of him and the reader plate beside them, and he looked, for a long moment, at the recorder's bench. Ossian had not expected that. He was a small thrall in a plain sash. He was the least of the offices in the long chamber. His whole art was to be unseen. And the high adjudicator of the conquered, at the hinge of the hardest decision of his 11 years on the bench, looked past the counselors and the marshal and the scholars and the boy, and looked at the recorder, and Ossian understood why, though it took him a moment. Vaunt was not asking Ossian for anything. He was looking at the one creature in the room whose whole function was to remember exactly what was about to happen. He was looking at the record's face. And a creature deciding whether to do a hard, true thing looks, at the last, at the thing that will remember whether it did. "Recorder," Vaughn said, "you refused twice today to strike a true thing from the record, once for the marshal, once for the routing. On the second occasion you produced, from your own memory, a filing that no one had asked you for, that undid the bench's own morning's work, and that you must have known would make an enemy of a counselor who will outlive your career." He was quiet a moment. Why? Ashen thought about it. He owed the question a real answer. He could feel that he owed it a real answer in front of everyone, and that the answer would go into the record he himself was keeping, which was a strange loop to stand inside. "Because I stamped it the first time," Ashen said. "The father's warning. I put the record stamp on no cause found and archived it and forgot it, and a good man died, and I told myself my function was only to record that the disposition had been made, not to ask whether it should have. I have told myself that for 11 years, adjudicator, about a great many things, and it has always been true, and it has always been enough." He looked down at the ledger plate, at the day's work, at the whole terrible true length of it in his own careful hand. "It was not enough this morning. I wrote no cause into the boy's petition before the doors ever opened, and it caught in my throat, and I did not know why until I remembered where I had seen those 3 words before. I do not think the record's function is only to remember what the bench decided. I think that is what we made it, to keep it safe. But I think, underneath that, its function is to remember what was true, and to go on remembering it after everyone who would rather it forgot has gone home. I could not strike the marshal's word or the routing or the filing because they were true. That is the whole of my reason. I am a recorder. In the end I found that I would rather keep a true record and lose my career than keep my career and know I had kept a false one." He almost smiled, and did not quite. "It is not a very brave reason. It is only that I am too old to start lying to the archive now." Vaughn looked at him for a long moment more. Then he nodded once slowly and turned back to the bench, and Ashen understood that the decision had been made, and that he had, without meaning to, helped make it, and that this was the most anyone would ever be able to say of a recorder, and that it was enough. "The mark stands in the open record," Vaughn said. He said it flatly, the way he said everything, and the flatness was the mercy and the sentence both. Counselor Adrigal offers to spare the bench a hard precedent. The marshal answers that the office is owed the truth and nothing else. The marshal is correct. I have spent this whole day learning, in front of 200 witnesses, that the record cannot be managed, that a true thing, once it is in it, will not be struck by rank or bought by mercy or frightened out by fear, and that this is not a flaw in the record but the entire purpose of it, and that the founders knew exactly what they were building when they built the routing to right itself. They built it to protect the small from the great. It has done that today. I will not be the adjudicator who unbuilds it to protect the great from the small." He turned to the third seat from the rail. "Counselor Adrigal, your oversight mark disposition the engineer's warning. It stands in the open record, with the routing, with the numbers you read, with the disposition you entered. You will resign your seat, and the holding will be sold, and the water regraded those you offered, and the bench accepts them, but you will do it in the light, on the record, under your own name, because that is what the office was owed, and it is the last thing the office will ever collect from you. The adjudicature will convene a full inquiry into the disposition, and you will answer it, not quietly, in the open, as the engineer filed, as the marshal wrote, as the recorder kept." Adrigal said nothing. There was, at last, nothing left in the clever old creature to say. Every room was spent. And he rose from the third seat slowly, with the boneless calm he had worn all his long life, and it did not desert him even now, and he made the small formal gesture of a counselor vacating a seat, and he went down from the high bench for the last time, and no one stopped him, and no one helped him, and the seat he left was empty in a way that the whole chamber felt, because an empty seat on the high bench is the loudest thing the conquered owns. Ashen wrote it. Councillor Adrigal vacated the third seat. The oversight mark stands in the open record. He wrote it steady, and this time the steadiness was not a cost. It was the thing itself. It was the record doing, at last in the daylight, the one thing it had been built 40 founders ago to do. What followed took the better part of an hour, and Ashen recorded all of it. And for once the recording was a pleasure, because the record had turned the corner from keeping a wrong and now got to keep a set of rights. And a recorder feels that turn in his fingers the way a farmer feels the season turn in his knees. Vaunt gave the boy his 3 things, in the order the boy had asked for them, because the boy had asked for them in the right order, and Vaunt was too spent to improve on it. The water first. The adjudicature affirmed the water right of Coldwater settlement in full and in perpetuity, the intake and the lease and the channel, and it went further than the boy had asked, because a bench that has been badly wrong will often overcorrect, and this was a good day to let it. It ordered the upstream diversion not merely regraded but decommissioned, the new channel filled, and the melt returned entirely to the old course the engineer had known, and it entered a standing order that no diversion above a human intake could ever again be cut without the intake keeper's own filing entered in the open record and answered in the open record by name, above a desk. They asked the boy as a courtesy whether that met his need. The boy said his father would have called it good engineering, and that his father did not hand out good engineering lightly, and Ashen wrote that down too, because it was the nearest the boy came, all day, to something like peace. The name second. This was the one Ashen had wondered whether the bench could do, because it is one thing to change what a bench decides and another to change what a bench has already written, and the record does not like to be rewritten even in a good cause. But there is an old provision, older than Vaunt, for exactly this, a correction of the record, which does not strike the wrong thing but writes the true thing beside it, so that anyone reading the archive 100 years on sees both the error and its correction, and knows the bench was capable of being wrong and capable of saying so. Vaunt entered the correction himself. Where the morning's ruling said Sam Wren, engineer, died in an accident of the flood season, the correction now stood beside it in Ashen's careful old script. Sam Wren, engineer of Coldwater, filed a written warning that the upstream diversion would overtop and flood the lower basin. The warning was true. It was dispositioned, no cause found from a councillor's oversight. The flood came as he foretold. He died at his post, attempting to save the intake he had warned could not be saved, having warned the conquered in writing and been refused. The record finds he did not die careless. The record finds he died correct and refused. Vaunt read the correction aloud before he entered it, and when he came to he died correct and refused, the long chamber was silent, and the boy stood very still, and the old dog leaned its weight into his leg, and the boy put his hand down and held on. The dog third. This one, oddly, gave the bench the most trouble, and the trouble was almost comic after everything. And Ashen suspected the room needed something almost comic by then, because a room cannot hold that much weight for that long without cracking, and it is better to crack toward laughter than the other way. The disposal order was struck. That part was instant. Vaunt struck it before anyone could draw breath, and Councillor Adrigal's earlier motion to strike it, made in his last hour on the bench, was allowed to stand as the vehicle, which meant that the last official act of the councillor who had ordered the dog killed was, in the end, the motion that saved it, and Ashen recorded that with a straight face and privately thought the record had a crueler sense of justice than any bench. But then someone on the bench raised the small matter of the fauna statute, which was still on the books, which still said that a large earth carnivore could not be kept unlicensed on conquered land, and which the bench could not simply ignore without unmaking a law, and a councillor asked, reasonably, whether the adjudicature was now to issue a license. And if so, for what? Because the license forms had categories, and the categories were things like companion animal and working animal and livestock. and no one could quite bring themselves to write companion animal on a form for the creature that had made the moth flee across the floor. And no one could write working animal either, because who's worker? And no one was going to write livestock. And the whole bench sat there, at the end of the hardest day of its collective life, genuinely stuck on which box to tick. It was here that Otis woke up. He did it the way old dogs do, all at once and yet somehow gradually, a great heaving sigh, a shift of the enormous weight, the back legs stretching out behind and the front paws reaching forward and the whole rust-colored length of him trembling in a long, luxurious stretch, jaws cracking open in a yawn that showed, for one instant, exactly why the basin had feared him and exactly why it need not have. And then he was up, standing, blinking in the light. And he shook himself from nose to tail with a sound like a rug being beaten, sending a fine spray of drool and shed hair out across the marble of the long chamber that made the front tier recoil all over again, this time from something considerably less dignified than terror. Then he looked around in an unhurried and slightly bleary way at 200 of the most powerful people on Oral, none of whom moved, and he decided, on the basis of criteria known only to him, that the most interesting thing in the room was the wide, low ceremonial water basin that stood at the foot of the high bench, the one the Concord filled with basin water at the opening of every session as a symbol of the world's one true wealth, and he walked over to it, at his own pace, the whole chamber parting before him once more, and he put his great head down and he drank. He drank for a long time. The sound of it filled the long chamber, the enormous sloppy contented lapping of a big old dog drinking his fill of the very water the whole case had been about, the water his man had died keeping, the water the bench had just made safe. And Ossian looked around at the room and saw, on face after face, counselors, cadets, marines, scholars, the exact same expression, which was the expression of people who have just watched the most feared creature on their world walk up to the sacred basin of the Concord and drink out of it like a farm dog at a trough, and who understand that there is nothing, nothing at all, that they are willing to do about it. When he had finished, he lifted his dripping jowls, and he looked at the high bench with polite unconcern, water sheeting off his chin onto the marble, and then he walked back across the floor to the boy and sat down against his leg with a thump and leaned there, heavy and damp and enormous, and looked up at the boy with the plain, devoted patience of an animal waiting to be told it was time to go home. "Companion animal," Eli said into the silence mildly. "You can write companion animal. That's all he's ever been." And the counselor with the form, after a moment, wrote companion animal, and Ossian recorded that the license was issued under that category, and somewhere in the writing of it the long chamber finally, quietly, cracked toward laughter, not much, a low rueful sound moving along the tiers, the sound of 200 people letting go of a breath they had held for 2 hours, and it was the best sound Ossian had heard in the chamber in 11 years, and he did not write it down, because some things the record is better off leaving to the ones who were there. There was one more thing the bench did before it let the boy go, and it did it on its own motion, and Ossian had not expected it, and it turned out to be the thing the day was remembered by, more even than the maw, more even than the mark. It was Marshal Thren who moved it. She had stood through the rulings without asking for anything for herself, and Ossian had thought she wanted nothing, and he had been wrong. She wanted the one thing a soldier wants, which is for the deaths to have taught something that stays taught. "Adjudicator," she said. "The garrison has a standing order for the Coldwater Basin. Adept Islu wrote it. It says no fewer than a full section after dark, armed, prepared to engage. It has stood for 4 years. It got 11 of my people killed, because it sent them into a guardian's rounds with fire, looking like exactly the thing the guardian exists to answer. I would strike it, and I would replace it with a new one, and I would ask the bench to enter the new one in the doctrine in the open, so that the next marshal cannot quietly let it lapse." "Read it," Vaughn said. Thren had clearly already written it. She had written it, Ashen suspected in her head over 4 years and 11 letters, and had only been waiting her whole career for a day she could say it aloud. "The order is one line," she said. "It is this. In the Coldwater Basin the road is kept. Do not go armed against the thing that keeps it. If you must cross the basin after dark, go as the lost go, few, quiet, unarmed, and openly, and you will be seen to morning. Go as hunters go, many, armed with fire, and you will be answered. The basin is not ours to master. It is kept, and it was kept before we came, and the keeping is not our enemy. Leave the road to the one that walks it." She paused. "I would call the order by a name, so the cadets remember it, because cadets remember a thing with a name and forget a thing with a number. I would call it the Keeper's Leave." Ashen wrote it into the doctrine in the old script, every word, and titled it as she asked, "The Keeper's Leave. Standing Order, Coldwater Basin." And as he wrote it, he understood that the conquered had just done the thing the conquered did, the thing that was half foolish and half the most sensible thing in the galaxy. It had taken a boy's dog walking a water channel every morning for 13 years, and it had turned it into law, solemn, titled, entered in the doctrine, to be recited by scaled cadets 100 years hence who would never know they were reciting the morning rounds of a Saint Bernard named Otis, and who would be safer for the reciting, and whose safety would be the animal's last and longest gift, given, as all its gifts were given, without the animal ever knowing it had given anything at all. And it was the youngest voice in the chamber that spoke the thing the whole room was thinking and had been too proud to say. One of the scaled cadets from the Garrison Academy, a green one, up in the high tiers, who had climbed down from terror an hour ago, and had watched everything since with the wide, unguarded eyes of the young, and who said now, not loudly, but into a silence that carried it to every corner of the long chamber, "We spend everything on the maw." The cadet was looking at the empty west approach, at the pool of light, at the damp, enormous animal leaning on the boy. 40 generations breeding it, the deep hold, the metal from the sky. "We made the most dangerous thing on Oral, and we kept it under the garrison, and we told ourselves it made us safe. And the humans didn't make anything. They came down on a lease nobody wanted, and they found a half-drowned dog in a drift, and they thawed it out by a stove and shared their rations with it. And 13 years later it walked in here, and our most dangerous thing ran from it across the floor." The cadet shook its young head slowly. "They didn't breed it. They didn't chain it. They just fed it and walked with it and loved it, and it turned into that. What kind of world do they come from, that their old family dog is the thing our champion is afraid of? And what were we ever going to do to people like that, with a beast in a pit, that they hadn't already outgrown before they ever left home?" Nobody answered the cadet. There was no answer, or the answer was too large for the chamber to hold, or the answer was simply the animal itself, standing in the light, leaning on a boy, waiting patiently to go home. But Ashen wrote the question down, all of it, word for word, because he had learned by then that the truest things said in the long chamber were not said by the bench, and because he thought some cadet 100 years on, reading the archive, might need to see it. The day the conquered looked at a human's pet and understood, all at once and too late, what it had never understood about the humans. That a people is known not by the weapons it builds, but by what it loves, and by what its love, given long enough and freely enough, is quietly capable of becoming. "His name is Otis," Eli said one more time gently to the cadet, to the chamber, to the record. He did not seem to be correcting anyone now. He seemed only to want it kept. "Not Sevas, Otis. When you write your order and your cadets recite it, and you tell them about the keeper of the basin, his name was Otis, and he was a good dog, and that's the truest thing in your whole book." Ashen wrote it. His name was Otis. He was a good dog. It sat in the doctrine of the conquered of Oral, in the recorder's careful old script, directly beneath the standing order it had inspired, and it is there still, and it will outlast every seal Ashen ever witnessed and most of the counselors he ever served. And of all the 10,000 true things he set into the record across his long career, it is the one he was proudest to have kept. And then it was over, in the way these things are over, which is to say that the enormous machinery of the Concord, having ground the wrong way all morning, simply stopped and let a boy and a dog walk out of it. Vaughn made the formal close. He did it properly this time, with a new seal, green wax poured fresh over the corrected record, and he pressed the ring of his office into it, and the little wet crunch came again, and the disc cooled and hardened, and this time the sound did not fold a life shut. This time it kept one. The matter of the Coldwater petition is concluded, Vaughn said, and the words were the same words he had said that morning, exactly the same, and Ossian wrote them exactly the same, and they meant the entire opposite thing, and that, Ossian thought, was the whole of the Concord in a single sentence. It was not the words that were just or unjust, it was only ever what was underneath them, and the record's one job was to make sure that what was underneath could still be read after the words had gone cold. The human's claims are affirmed, Vaughn said, the record is corrected, the water is made safe, the animal is licensed to its keeper. And the adjudicature notes, for whoever reads this after us, that it closed this matter once in error and reopened it by its own hand, and that it was brought to do so by a marshal who would not lie to 11 families, and a scholar who would not defend a wrong register, and a recorder who would not strike a true thing, and a young man who would not raise his voice. And Vaughn paused, and Ossian looked up, because Vaughn did not usually depart from the formula, and Vaughn was looking at the animal. And a companion animal of earth licensed, who did nothing at all in this chamber but sleep and drink and lean against the one it loved, and who was, in the doing of exactly that and nothing more, the most persuasive witness ever to appear before this bench. Let the record show the bench thanks it, and does not expect it to understand the thanks, and his content that it does not need to. Ossian wrote all of it. It was the only time in 11 years he ever recorded a high adjudicator thanking a dog, and he said it in the old script with great care, and he did not think anyone would ever strike it, and no one ever did. The boy gathered his father's dog to go home. He did not take up the broken chain. He left it lying on the marble where he had set it hours before. A length of thumb-thick garrison stock snapped clean in two, and Ossian noticed that no one moved to clear it away, and he understood that it would probably lie there a while, that the chamber would leave it where it was for a day or a week the way a people leaves a thing that has taught it something, and that some clerk would eventually file it somewhere, and that it too was now, in its plain, broken way, part of the record. Marshal Thrin walked them out. She fell in beside the boy without being asked, on the side away from the dog, at a soldier's respectful distance, and Ossian saw the boy glance at her and say something too low to carry, and saw the marshal answer it, and saw the boy nod. He would learn later, because a recorder learns everything eventually, what she had said. She had asked the boy whether she might come to Coldwater when the inquiry was done, and stand at the lower gate where his father had died, and say the 11 names there, because 11 of her soldiers had died in that basin believing they were hunting a monster, and she wanted to tell them, in the place it happened, that they had not died fighting a monster after all, that they had died in a misunderstanding the Concord made, and a boy's dog had spent 13 years trying to prevent, and that she was going to spend the rest of her career making sure the misunderstanding was never made again. And the boy had said yes. And the boy had said his father would have liked her, because his father had liked people who checked their gates, and that was what she was doing in her way, coming back to check the gate that had been left open too long. Ossian recorded none of that, because it was not said in the chamber, but he set it down here in the account, because a record that keeps only what is said before the bench and nothing of what is said walking out of it is a record that has forgotten what the bench is for. The great bronze doors stood open at the end of the long approach, the way they had stood open when the animal came through them, and the noon light of Orel fell down the hall in a long bright wedge, and the boy and the marshal and the enormous damp old dog walked out of the long chamber and into it, unhurried, the dog padding along at the boy's left knee at the exact patient pace it had walked in. And the last Ossian saw of Otis of Coldwater was the great rust-colored shape of him passing out of the shadow of the doors and into the full daylight, his coat lighting up gold and foam white where the sun struck it, his tail moving in a slow content sweep, an old dog walking home in the middle of the day beside the person who was his whole idea, having no notion whatever that he had spent the morning remaking the law of a world, and needing none, because he had everything he had ever wanted, which was a warm day and a full belly and his own to walk beside, and had never once, in all his life, wanted anything more than that, which was exactly why he had always been enough. The doors did not close behind them. Someone would close them eventually. For a while they simply stood open, and the daylight came all the way down the approach and into the long chamber, and lit the pool of marble where the beast had slept, and the broken chain, and the empty third seat, and the recorder at his bench, still writing. Ossian finished the record after the chamber had emptied. That was the recorder's last duty of any session, to close the day's ledger while the room went cold around him, to read back the whole of it and set the final stamp and seal the plate so that what had been written could no longer be unwritten. He had done it 10,000 times to an empty chamber and never minded the emptiness. A recorder is good company for himself, and the record is better company than most. He did it now in the long slant of the afternoon light, alone but for the 2 cleaning clerks who moved along the tiers gathering what 200 frightened people leave behind, and the broken chain that no one had cleared, and the empty third seat. Vaunt found him there. Ossian had not heard him come. The high adjudicator had shed his layered robes for the plain underrobe he wore between sessions, and without the gray weight of the office he looked older and smaller and, Ossian thought, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "You will have made an enemy today," Vaunt said. "Adrigal is finished, but Adrigal has friends, and the friends will remember that it was a recorder's memory that finished him. They will find reasons over the years to make your work harder. You understand that. You did it anyway." "I did it anyway," Ossian agreed. Vaunt looked at the sealed plate under Ossian's hands, the day's record, closed now, unstrikable. "For 11 years," he said, "I have thought of the recorder as the smallest office at the bench, the one that only writes down what the rest of us decide. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about it in a way that nearly cost 140 people their water and a good man his name, and I find I do not much like being shown my errors twice in one day by the same small office." He was quiet a moment. "But I would rather be shown them than not. Keep your record true, recorder. It appears to be the only thing in this Concord that cannot be bought, frightened, or reasoned with, and I have decided, in my old age, that I would like at least one such thing to exist, even if it is forever going to be inconvenient to me, especially if it is." He left. Ossian sat a while longer with the closed plate, and then he did a thing he had never done in 11 years, which was to open a fresh personal margin line at the foot of the day's record. The small space a recorder is permitted for a note in his own voice, which almost no recorder ever uses, because a recorder's whole training is to keep his own voice out, and he wrote in it 1 line. "I stamped the father's warning no cause and forgot it. I will not forget again. Let the archive hold that I said so," and he sealed it in, and it is there. The inquiry into Counselor Adrigal ran through the dry season and into the next, and Ossian recorded most of it, and it went the way such things go, slowly, thoroughly in the open, as Vaunt had ordered, with the routing and the numbers and the mark read out over and over until there was nothing left to argue. The holding was sold. The proceeds went, by the bench's order, to the 11 families and to Coldwater in equal measure, which pleased no one entirely and was therefore probably just. Adrigal himself Ossian saw only once more at the last session of the inquiry, an old creature answering plainly at last because there was nothing left to answer with cleverness, and Ossian felt, watching him, not triumph and not even satisfaction, but the flat gray thing a recorder feels at the end of any true accounting, which is only, "It is written down now, and it is written down right, and that will have to be enough, because it is all the record was ever able to give anyone. The diversion was decommissioned before the next melt. The new channel was filled and the melt returned to the old course, exactly as the engineer had specified in the filing that had been stamped no cause, so that in the end the Concord did the precise thing Sam Wren had asked it to do in writing, at the precise cost he had said it would take, 1 full year and 1 dead engineer too late. And Ossian went to Coldwater. He had never in his life asked to travel. Recorders do not travel, the record comes to them. But the decommission carried a correction order that had to be entered into the settlement's own works log by a certified hand, and the certified hands at the adjudicature were the recorders. And when the works office asked which recorder would make the journey out to the basin, Ossian, to his own surprise, said that he would. He went out in the early melt, when Oral's dry sky went briefly soft with the runoff, and the basin, for a few weeks, was as green as it ever got. He had never seen the basin. He had recorded 4 years of it and never seen it. It was wider than he had imagined and quieter, a long green trough between pale ridges, the melt coming down off the heights in 100 bright threads, and the old channel running straight and true down the middle of it, carrying the whole of the melt now the way it had before the Concord ever cut a second course. And at the head of the channel stood Coldwater, 140 souls, a pump house, a scatter of low, bright buildings, an intake that worked, a settlement that had. Against every ruling the Concord had first handed it, kept its water and its name. Ossian entered the correction order into the works log with a certified hand, and the settlement's new waterkeeper thanked him gravely. And then, because it was near the 7th hour and the recorder had come a long way and looked like he could use it, offered him a place to stand at the top of the channel where the morning light was good, and told him, if he wanted to see the thing the whole basin set its clock by, to watch the lower gate. So Ossian watched the lower gate. At the 7th hour, 2 shapes came up the channel from the lower gate. The light was behind them, low and gold off the melt, and for a moment they were only shapes, a narrow upright one and a low heavy one, moving up the bank at an unhurried, even pace, and Ossian felt something turn over in his chest before his eyes had finished telling him what he was looking at, because he had heard this described, he had written this described, he had set into the doctrine of the Concord a standing order built on exactly this, a water engineer and his dog, walking the channel every morning to keep 140 people alive, and here it was, in front of him, in the flesh, in the gold light of the melt, and it was the most ordinary thing he had ever seen, and it made his throat close. It was the boy, Eli Wren, a season older, in the same gray coat gone pale at the elbows, walking up the bank with his hands loose and his eyes on the gates, stopping every so often to crouch at a fitting and test it and move on, checking the intake the way his father had checked it for 19 years. The way he would check it now for however many years the melt kept coming, which on Oral was forever. And at his left knee, matching him stride for patient stride, gray in the muzzle and vast as a landslide and utterly at his ease, walked the old dog. Otis was older too. Ossian could see it in the way he moved, a little stiff in the mornings now, the season had told on him, he took the soft ground carefully. But he walked the channel at the boy's knee with the plain, deep contentment of an animal doing the one thing it had always done and loved. And when the boy crouched at a fitting, the dog stopped and sat and waited. And when the boy rose, the dog rose, and the two of them went on up the bank together toward the head of the channel where the recorder stood watching. And behind them the whole settlement was already stirring, because it was the 7th hour, because Eli and Otis were coming up from the lower gate, because the water was good for another day. The boys saw him at the top of the channel and knew him. Ossian had not been sure he would. They had exchanged perhaps 100 words across the worst day of the boy's life, and the boy had been looking mostly at the bench. But Eli's face changed with recognition, and he came the last of the way up and stopped, and the old dog came up beside him and stopped too, and looked at Ossian with its dark, wet, unbothered eyes. And then Ossian would remember this to the end of his life. The great tail moved once, a slow content sweep through the morning air, and the enormous head lowered, and Otis of Coldwater leaned his vast gray-muzzled weight, gently, briefly, against the recorder's side, the way he leaned against the boy. The way he leaned against the ones he had decided were, in some plain, unhurried way of his own, all right. Ashen stood very still and let himself be leaned on by the most feared creature on Oral, and understood at last, in his body and not only in the record, what the whole of the case had been about. "He remembers you," Eli said. He sounded a little surprised and pleased. "He doesn't do that for many. He must have decided you were one of the good ones. He was right for what it's worth. I read the record, all of it. I know what you did." He put his hand on the old dog's skull between the ears, the same gesture, the one that was half affection and half how the boy held himself steady. "Thank you for not striking it, for remembering the filing." "My father," he stopped, and looked out over the green basin and the bright threads of the melt, and did not finish it, and did not need to. They stood a while at the head of the channel, and watched the water come down. Ashen asked, because a recorder always asks about the intake, and the boy showed him, the pump house his father had died in, running clean and steady, the lower gate rebuilt that had not held the surge and held everything now, and beside the lower gate, set into a flat pale stone, a small plate with 11 names on it, and a 12th line beneath the 11 that was not a name but a date and 4 words, and Ashen went down to read it, and the 4 words were, "And one good engineer." Marshal Thren had come then, as she said she would, and said the 11 names at the gate and left the plate, and added the 12th line, and Ashen stood in front of it in the gold light, and read the 11 names of the soldiers who had died believing they hunted a monster, and the 12th line for the engineer who had died trying to keep the monster from ever having to answer, and he thought that it was, in its plain graven way, a better record than any he had ever sealed at the bench, because it kept the whole of the truth in the fewest possible words, and would go on keeping it in the weather for as long as the stone lasted, which on dry Oral was a very long time. "They teach it now," Eli said when Ashen came back up. "The garrison, the keepers leave, Thren told me. The cadets have to recite it before they're posted to the basin. Leave the road to the one that walks it." He almost smiled. "They don't know it's him. Thren kept his name out of the order itself, on purpose. She said a doctrine lasts longer if it sounds like it was always true, and if the cadets knew the keeper of the basin was a Saint Bernard named Otis, they'd never take it seriously. And then someday one of them would go into the basin at night with fire, and—" he shrugged. "So the order doesn't say his name, but the doctrine does, right underneath it. You wrote it there yourself. His name was Otis. He was a good dog." He looked down at the animal leaning on his leg in the morning light. "That's the part I care about. The order keeps them safe. The name keeps him true. I can live with the rest." Ashen stayed the day at Coldwater, though his duty was long discharged, because the settlement asked him to, and because he found he did not want to go. They fed him at the pump house from the common pot, plain food, a working settlement's food, the kind a place shares when it has just enough and no more, and they asked him, shyly, about the day in the long chamber, because they had heard it only second-hand. And Ashen, who had spent 11 years keeping his own voice out of everything, told them. He told them about the doors opening, and the beast coming down the aisle in the noon light. He told them about the maw, and how it had fled across the floor with its throat bared, and the human children of Coldwater listened with their mouths open, and their parents listened with something quieter and harder to name, because these were the people who had shared their winter rations with a half-drowned dog 13 years before, and had never once, in all the years since, thought of him as anything but Sam Wren's Otis. And it was a strange thing for them to hear their own gentle old dog described as the terror that turned over the highest bench on the planet. They looked at him differently after, the settlers not afraid. They would never be afraid of Otis, but the way you look at a thing you had all along and never fully saw. The dog himself slept through the whole telling, by the stove, in the warmest patch of floor in the room, exactly as he had slept through the chamber. And Ashen thought that was right. That was as it should be. that the one soul in the whole affair who had never needed to understand any of it was the one who had settled the whole of it, and that the not needing was the very thing that had made him able to. He left in the last light in the works transport, with the correction order entered and his duty done and a long ride back to the capital ahead of him, and the boy walked him to the transport with the old dog at his knee, and there was not much left to say, and they did not try to say much. At the transport the boy put out his hand in the human way, and Ashen took it in the Threll way, 4 writing fingers folded gently around the boy's plain calloused ones, and the boy said, "If you're ever out this way in the melt, you know where the road is." "Leave the road to the one that walks it," Ashen said. The boy laughed the first time Ashen had ever heard him laugh, a short surprised sound, and said, "That's the one," and stepped back, and the old dog leaned once more against Ashen's side in farewell, and then the transport pulled out and up the channel and Ashen watched Coldwater fall away behind him in the gold light, the pump house and the low bright buildings and the small pale stone by the lower gate with its 12 lines, and the 2 shapes standing at the head of the channel, one narrow and upright and one low and vast, watching him go, until the ridge came between them and he could not see them any more. He went back to the bench. He is there still as far as this account knows. Recorders serve long and the archive is patient with its keepers. He served out the rest of Vaughant's tenure and into the next adjudicators, and he kept the record true, and Adrigal's friends did, as Vaughant had warned, find reasons over the years to make his work harder, and Ashen did the harder work and kept the record true anyway, because he had told the archive he would, and because the archive, unlike everything else at the bench, remembered exactly what you had promised it. He thought about the case sometimes, in the long quiet after a session, when the chamber emptied and went cold, and the afternoon light came down the approach through the doors that no one ever quite got around to keeping shut. He thought about how close it had come to ending the other way. A seal had been pressed. Green wax over a boy's whole life, cooling from soft to hard, from a thing that could be argued to a thing that could not, and in 3 heartbeats it had gone hard, and the case had been closed, and if the day had ended there, if the doors had stayed shut, if the animal had stayed in its wagon on its chain the way a reasonable animal would have, if the boy had wept and shouted and been let out the way petitioners were let out, then the record would say what the record was first made to say. No cause. The father careless, the water conquered water, the dog destroyed. And it would be true in the archive forever, the way a lie is true once no one is left to argue it, and no one would ever have known any different, because the thing about a closed case is that it is closed, and the whole design of a bench is to make the closing final. It had not been final, and the thing that had made it not final was not a weapon, and not an army, and not a clever argument, and not even, in the end, the recorder's memory, or the marshal's honesty, or the scholar's map, though all of those had done their part. The thing that had reopened the closed case of a young man the council had written off was that the most feared creature on the whole of Oral had walked 40 leagues through 3 garrison checkpoints in the plain light of noon, past every soldier trained to stop it and every protocol built to hold it, for no reason the conquered could put in a file, and had lain down at the boy's feet, and had put its head on its paws and had gone to sleep. It had not threatened anyone. It had not needed to. It had simply lain down beside the one it loved, in the middle of the room where the powerful had just decided that the one it loved did not matter. And in the lying down it had said, more plainly than any petition, in a language every creature in that chamber understood in its oldest blood, "You have got this wrong, and I am going to stay right here calmly in the light until you understand how wrong." They had understood. It had cost them a counselor and a comfortable lie and the pleasant belief that they were the most dangerous thing on their own world. And they had paid all of it, in the open, on the record. And the boy had gone home with his water and his father's name and his father's dog. And the water still comes down the old channel every melt. And the settlement still sets its clock by the 7th hour. And somewhere in the archive of the conquered of Oral, in a recorder's careful old script, beneath a standing order that keeps young soldiers alive without their ever knowing why. There are 2 lines that Ossian the recorder kept when he could have let them go, and that he counts. Of all the 10,000 true things he ever said into the record, the truest and the best. His name was Otis. He was a good dog.